Next lesson for today is going to be talking about ecosystem changes and how ecosystems can change over time. A crucial component of that is carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is the maximum population size that can be supported by the resources that are available in an ecosystem. There can only be as many organisms as the environmental resources can support. It's just another way to think about it. The deer population here in this photo, we see how it kind of levels off. We could estimate the carrying capacity as where it kind of balances out. So if we had to put a carrying capacity line in there, that's where we could put it. We see population growth in a couple of ways. We see it as a J-shaped curve or an S-shaped curve, which we'll talk about in a different slide here. But the idea that population can grow beyond carrying capacity is true. However, it is unsustainable. It can't be supported beyond carrying capacity forever. So what kind of population growth do we see? Like I said, in the last slide you saw J and S curves together. All I wanted to show you here is that this is exponential growth. So this is our exponential growth here all the way up. And then usually it leads to population crash. So this is another one we can call a boom and a bust. All right, so we could call it that way too. But this is our J for sure. And it kind of looks like a J, right? We see that J right there. What does this represent? It represents an organism's population exceeding carrying capacity, running out of resources, and then dying off. All right. Doesn't always die off all the way. A lot of times it just has to dip back below carrying capacity and can level out again. If it does level out again, then what we see is really an S curve start to unfold. Here we see our S curve. So what do we have? We have exponential growth all the way up to here. So this is so it's exactly the same as a J curve. And then here we see this little transition. And then here we see a plateau phase. So it levels off. So we have kind of a 1, 2, 3. What happens? Why does it level off? Well, it levels off because of this same reason up here. The population usually exceeds carrying capacity. It doesn't level off perfectly like this. Usually what it looks like is on the previous slide you saw one too, but you'll see the population kind of transition and then exceed, and then some start to die off. Then it dips below, and we see this. Now, this red line is still carrying capacity, but we see population kind of go above and below depending on the resources that are available in the struggle for survival. So, what are some key factors for impacting population growth? We have density-independent factors and density-dependent factors. The easiest way to keep them separate, to understand them better, is to think about if it's independent, it's doing it by itself regardless of population size. So it's going to impact animals in exactly the same way no matter how packed together they are or not. Perfect examples are storms, floods, fires, pollution. Those things are going to harm the same number of animals in an ecosystem no matter how packed together the population is. Its impact is going to be the same. So think about it this way. A storm that goes into a forest is not going to be stronger if there's 1,000 birds or one bird, right? The storm is just going to be the storm, and it's going to knock down just as many trees as it would regardless of how many animals were there. Okay. Density-dependent factors actually increase based on the density of those organisms. So the factor is going to increase based on the population size. So something like disease, competition for food, all those things are going to be density-dependent. Disease in particular is a big one. Think about it. If there's people packed closely together in a room, is a cold or a flu going to spread faster? Absolutely. So the impact of that cold or flu is going to be higher if the population is higher. Population sampling is something we'll discuss in class. So there's two things we can do. We can basically estimate the population of organisms in an ecosystem. We look at animals one way and plants another way. The keys takeaways for population sampling are this, and this is talking about animals. It has to be random, and same with plants. Random sampling is important. There can't be bias. We want to eliminate bias. We want to utilize population samples from ecosystems. Why do we sample? Why don't we just go out and count every animal? Okay, maybe with deer that's something we could do, but that'd be really hard. Think about all the ants in an anthill. There's 500,000 ants in an anthill. How do you count them all? How do you get to them? Especially without disturbing their entire environment. So we have to remember that estimates are as good as we can do in population sampling. Ecosystems are just too large to study every individual. So because they're too large, we can't count them all. They're going to be an estimate. If we're going to estimate something accurately, it has to be done randomly, so we take our bias away. The Lincoln Index is a way to do that. It's also referred to as capture, mark, release, recapture. See that down here. And the formula for that is right here. N1 times N2 divided by N3. And we'll work on that in class instead of showing you examples here. Estimating populations of plants is done differently. For animals, we do that capture, mark, release, recapture. The issue with plants is you don't really capture plants because they're stationary, so that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. What we can do is sample plants in their natural environment, still randomly using this tool called a quadrat. It's just basically a square, portable frame, usually 1 meter. In class, ours are going to be a half a meter or 0.5 meters squared. Quadrat is what we'll use. The quadrats can be placed randomly or systematically. No matter what, we're sampling a random part of the ecosystem. Even if it's systematic, that just means laying them in rows. So maybe this is like, we're looking at it and saying this is going to be 1 meter here, 1 meter here, and 2 meters here. Difference. All right, that's all they're saying. Where random is just kind of randomly placed. It's usually a table of numbers, a random table of numbers that allows us to place it here on a grid system. That's the best way, or they can just be thrown randomly. Those are two ways that we could do that. So that was how we estimate populations. Another way ecosystems change besides their population growth is just their physical makeup. This ecosystems change through a number of ways, but we can break it down into two big categories: primary succession and secondary succession. Succession really is just, when you think about succession, just think about it's a change over time. Really, it's just aging. Just aging. That's all it is. Things are going to look differently at the beginning than they do at the end. Everything ages in one way or another. Primary succession, the key takeaway is that this is a process that's beginning with bare rock in an ecosystem. There's nothing there but bare rock. It needs to be colonized by pioneer organisms, things like lichens, mosses, weeds, things that can grow in really tough environments, that can start the process of building an ecosystem from nothing. All right, so that's what we're doing here. They're building. Secondary succession is a start over in an ecosystem, but it's really different because it's starting over from soil that's already there. So it's an established ecosystem that's just kind of been reset. There's going to be soil. All right, that's the takeaway. Here there's rock, here there's soil. What does this look like? Well, maybe after a forest fire. Everything's burned up, there's nothing living there anymore, but there's still soil. The ecosystem was established, there's stuff there, and then it's going to build from there. So this is a little bit faster because it doesn't have to build that base. So organisms changing. Organisms have two characteristics, or two kind of lifestyles or reproductive strategies, we'll call them. An R strategist and K strategist. Simple T chart in your notes would be awesome for this. What you go ahead and do is just one of those. Boom. That's all you got to do. What we're talking about here is really pretty simple because everything on this side is the opposite of this side. But what is an R strategist? R strategists are things like, think about insects and how they live. They have small body size, they mature quickly, they have a short lifespan, they live in unstable environments, they can have a lot of offspring, lay a lot of eggs, a lot of them hatch all at once. There's little or no parental care, there's no good mama fruit flies out there, they just let their eggs hatch and go about their business, right? That's one way to be successful. A lot of these organisms die early in their life, but some survive with little or no parental care, and it happens at a very fast rate. The other way to look at this is the K strategist. The K strategist has a large body size, it's going to mature slowly, have a long lifespan, live in very stable environments, has few offspring, and longer parental care. So you can see our fruit flies over here have one way to go about surviving and reproducing, and over here we have a totally different way, and usually larger mammals end up like this, like elephants, humans, and primates are going to fit into this category. So these gorillas, have one baby gorilla and take care of it until it's big, and it takes a long time to be mature. So 2 ways to go about reproducing. Survivorship curves can be shown in this way, and basically what we're looking at is R strategists, K strategists, and there's something called a C strategist, which is really kind of odd, and we don't really talk about that, so I'm just going to cross that out so you don't get confused. We're really just going to focus on R and K. We will categorize these types of survivorship curves. We're going to have a type 1 curve up here, Roman numeral 1. What this represents is when individuals are surviving for most of their lifespan. So it's the survival rate over a percentage of lifespan. So if we're talking about our gorilla, it might have 1 offspring, but it's going to survive until almost 100% of its lifespan. So it's going to live to be an old adult. We have this type 2. This is kind of weird. This is a pretty constant death rate. So things like corals and I don't know, like squirrels and stuff like that. There are some kind of animals that kind of fall in the middle that have a kind of a constant death rate, which is a little bit odd. And then we have this, which are our strategists we focus on a little bit more, which is a type 3 curve. And what we see is like our fruit flies, once like a whole bunch of fruit flies hatch, a whole bunch of them die right away. All right, from me smashing them in the kitchen or other organisms eating them or whatever, or just starving to death, they're going to die very quickly. And a very small percentage of those that start their life will live to their max lifespan. So we see this death rate very quickly, which makes sense. This is why they need to have so many eggs and so many kids.